Love is the most profound experience a human being can share, yet for some, it becomes a language they cannot truly speak. The narcissist stands before the world with confidence and charm, appearing capable of deep affection, but beneath that surface lies an emptiness that love cannot reach. To truly love, one must first see another person as real, as separate, as worthy of care beyond what they give in return. But for the narcissist, love is not about connection, it is about reflection. They do not see the other as a soul to embrace, but as a mirror that must endlessly affirm their worth. Their affection often begins intensely full of attention, passion, and promise, yet it fades when the illusion of perfection is broken. Because what they truly seek is not love, but admiration. They cannot give empathy where the self has become the only focus. This is not evil, it is a wound, a deep disconnection from the authentic heart that once longed to be seen and accepted. As we explore why narcissists cannot truly love, we also uncover a deeper truth within ourselves, that love without awareness becomes possession, and love without humility becomes illusion. Real love begins only when the ego softens, when the self no longer demands to be worshipped, but instead dares to understand and to give without condition. There are moments in life when what we call love is not truly love at all, but a reflection of our own unmet needs. It appears warm and genuine on the surface, yet beneath it lies an invisible hunger, the desire to be seen, admired, and validated. For the narcissist, this becomes the foundation of their relationships. They do not fall in love with another person. They fall in love with the reflection of themselves they find in that person's eyes. Affection becomes a mirror for the ego, and the connection that should bring growth and freedom instead becomes an endless performance of seeking and proving in this illusion of love. The other person is not embraced as a being with their own thoughts, feelings, and imperfections, but as an extension of the narcissist's image. The relationship becomes a stage where admiration must never fade, where devotion must never waver. The moment reality enters, when flaws appear, when disagreement arises, the illusion begins to crack, and the narcissist withdraws or retaliates. Love turns cold because it was never about giving. It was about maintaining the illusion of perfection that the ego depends upon. This is why so many relationships with narcissists feel draining and confusing, because the energy flows in only one direction, toward the fragile self that must constantly be fed in your own life. You may have felt the subtle pull of this illusion. Perhaps you have loved someone not for who they are, but for how they made you feel about yourself. Or perhaps you have been loved only for the role you played in another person's story. It is a painful realization, but also a powerful one, because it reveals that real love cannot exist where ego dominates. Love that is tied to self-image is conditional and fragile. It thrives only as long as admiration flows. But love that arises from awareness is free. It does not demand perfection. It does not depend on control. It does not seek to possess. True love begins when the mirror shatters, and you can finally see the other person as they are, not as a reflection of your worth, but as a soul walking their own path beside yours. It is born in humility, in the willingness to understand rather than to be glorified, in the courage to be vulnerable rather than impressive. When affection becomes service, when care replaces control, when empathy takes the place of expectation, love transforms from illusion into truth. And in that truth, you discover that the greatest beauty of love is not what it gives to your image, but what it reveals about your essence, that beyond the ego, beyond the mask, there is a heart capable of loving and being loved without fear. There is a subtle prison that many people live in without even realizing it, a prison built not of walls or chains, but of self-adoration. On the surface, it may appear as confidence, charm, or pride, but beneath it lies deep isolation. The narcissist becomes trapped in the endless worship of their own image, unable to see beyond themselves. Every interaction, every relationship, becomes a reflection of how they wish to be perceived, not a bridge of genuine connection. They live surrounded by people, yet remain profoundly alone, because their world revolves around the preservation of their ego's throne. When the self becomes the center of existence, others lose their reality. The narcissist listens not to understand, but to be admired. They give not to care, but to be praised. The heart, which was created to connect, becomes a mirror that reflects only the self. Love becomes performance, empathy becomes calculation, and vulnerability becomes threat. In such a state, true connection cannot breathe. Connection requires humility, the willingness to see another as equal, to step out of the self long enough to feel another's world. But narcissism does not allow this movement outward. It traps the person in constant self-reference, where every gesture must reinforce importance, and every moment must confirm superiority in your own life. You may have glimpsed this trap in subtle forms. Perhaps in moments when you needed recognition more than understanding, or when pride stopped you from truly listening. These are the small beginnings of the same pattern, the quiet ways in which ego closes the door to connection. But awareness is the key that unlocks this prison. The moment you notice the need to appear perfect, the moment you see yourself craving admiration, you also have the power to step back. You can choose presence instead of performance, sincerity instead of self-glorification. That choice, repeated in small moments, begins to free the heart from its own shadow. True connection is not built on admiration. It is built on authenticity. It grows in spaces where both people are allowed to be imperfect, where silence can replace performance, where the self does not need to dominate the moment. When you drop the constant need to be seen as special, you begin to see others clearly for the first time. Compassion replaces comparison, and love replaces control. The walls of pride soften, and something alive begins to move through you, something gentle, humble, and real. In that space, the illusion of separateness fades, and you realize that connection is not about being adored, it is about being present. The self that once demanded attention becomes the self that learns to give it. And in that giving, the heart finally finds the freedom it was always searching for beneath the surface of every charming smile, confident gesture, and magnetic presence. There can sometimes exist a silence too deep to name. For the narcissist, this silence is not peace, but emptiness, a hollow space where connection should have lived, but never fully grew. This emptiness becomes the secret core of their being, the wound they cannot touch, the truth they cannot face. To hide it, they build an image of perfection, surrounding themselves with admiration, success, and control. Yet no matter how brightly they shine, the emptiness remains, whispering beneath every triumph that something essential is missing. The charm that draws others near is not always born from love. Often it is born from need. The narcissist learns to enchant, to impress, to mirror what others desire, because attention feels like oxygen. But attention is not affection, and admiration is not intimacy. They collect praise like one collects treasures, yet the heart remains unsatisfied, because what it truly seeks cannot be bought or performed. It seeks to be seen for what is real, not for what is displayed. The tragedy is that the very mask that protects them also prevents anyone from truly knowing them. They become adored but unseen, surrounded by people yet untouched by love in your own life. You may have felt glimpses of this same emptiness, the the sense that no matter how much you achieve or how much others admire you, something inside still aches. This is the void that calls for truth, not applause. It is not a flaw to be ashamed of, but an invitation to return to your heart. The emptiness is not punishment. It is space waiting to be filled with authenticity, compassion, and presence. When you stop running from it, it begins to soften. When you face it, it begins to teach. It shows you that the source of love was never outside of you, but buried beneath the noise of trying to be enough. The charm that once felt like power begins to lose its importance when you realize it was only a defense. Real strength is not in being admired, but in being real. To understand the empty heart is to see that every wall built to keep pain away also keeps love away. When those walls begin to fall, something beautiful happens. Vulnerability enters, humility returns, and the capacity to feel deepens. The void that once terrified you becomes the birthplace of truth. Out of that silence rises a gentler presence, one that no longer needs to impress or control. And in that presence, you discover that the heart was never truly empty. It was simply waiting for you to stop pretending long enough to let love find its way back home. There is a kind of love that feels powerful at first, yet slowly drains the spirit. It offers warmth when you please, and withholds it when you falter. It praises when you perform, but grows distant when you reveal your truth. This is conditional love, the love that demands instead of accepts, that measures instead of embraces. The narcissist lives within this spell, both casting it and being bound by it. They offer affection not as a gift, but as a transaction, and they crave the same in return. Love, for them, becomes a tool to maintain control, to feed the ego, to keep the illusion alive. But conditional love can never nourish the heart, because it asks you to earn what was meant to be freely given in this spell. Many people lose themselves. They begin to confuse approval with love, compliance with care, and attention with connection. They mold their words, their choices, even their identities just to keep love close, believing that if they stop giving enough, they will no longer be worthy of it. Yet love that depends on conditions is not love. It is fear wearing a gentle disguise. It keeps you trapped in constant performance, forever trying to be enough for someone who cannot truly see you. The narcissist, too, is trapped here, unable to love freely because they have never known love without judgment, unable to receive deeply because they only understand affection through control. To break this spell is to awaken. It begins when you stop negotiating your worth. It begins when you realize that real love is not earned through perfection, obedience, or sacrifice, but through honesty and presence. When you choose to love without conditions, starting with yourself, the illusion loses its power. The need to please fades, the fear of rejection softens, and you begin to breathe again. You stop chasing love as a reward and begin to experience it as a state of being. This is where healing begins, not in fixing others, but in seeing clearly what love is and what it is not in your own life. The moment you choose authenticity over approval, you begin to step beyond conditional love. You stop being a reflection for someone else's ego and start living from your own truth. Real love allows imperfection, invites honesty, and grows in freedom. It does not bind, it liberates. It does not demand, it understands. When the spell breaks, relationships transform not because others change, but because your awareness does. You start to see that love is not something to win or keep. It is something to live. And when you live it from the depth of your being, you no longer seek mirrors to confirm your worth. You become the mirror of love itself, reflecting light wherever you go, untouched by conditions and free in the quiet strength of truth. There is a vast difference between being full of yourself and being aware of yourself. Self-obsession looks outward even while appearing to look inward. It is constantly comparing, analyzing, and seeking approval. It says, I am special, I am right, I must be seen. Self-awareness, on the other hand, is silent and clear. It does not need to prove, it simply understands. The narcissist remains trapped in self-obsession, revolving endlessly around their own image, mistaking admiration for love and control for connection. But love cannot breathe in a space filled only with the self. Love requires openness, a willingness to see another as equally real. The path from self-obsession to self-awareness is therefore not a journey of expansion outward, but a softening inward, a returning to the heart that has been hidden beneath layers of pride and fear in life. It is easy to confuse self-focus with self-knowledge. You might think about yourself constantly, your goals, your struggles, your image, yet never truly know who you are. Self-obsession feeds the ego, while self-awareness dissolves it. The shift begins the moment you stop asking how others see you and start asking what truth lives within you. Awareness does not criticize or glorify, it simply observes. It shines a gentle light on your motives, your wounds, your patterns. When you look without judgment, something begins to change. The noise of ego starts to quiet, and beneath it you discover stillness, a space untouched by comparison. Where compassion naturally grows, the narcissist fears this stillness because it threatens the illusion of superiority. But for you, embracing it becomes liberation. It allows you to see that love is not about being adored, but about being present. In awareness, the need to impress fades, the urge to control softens, and the heart begins to open. Real love flows from this openness. It does not seek to possess or dominate, it seeks to understand. It is no longer, I need you to make me feel worthy, but rather I see you, and in seeing you, I see myself. This kind of love is not bound by ego because it rises from consciousness, not craving when you live in self-awareness. Every relationship becomes a mirror that reflects truth instead of illusion. You no longer demand perfection because you no longer fear imperfection. You listen without needing to be right, you give without expecting return, and you love without losing yourself. The energy that once went into maintaining your image is now free to nourish your growth. The shift from self-obsession to self-awareness is not a rejection of self, but a rediscovery of it. It is the realization that you are not the image you protect, but the awareness that witnesses it. In that realization, love ceases to be a need and becomes your natural state, unconditional, expansive, and endlessly alive in the end. The journey of understanding why narcissists cannot truly love is not about judgment, but awakening. It reminds us that love without awareness becomes an illusion, and self without humility becomes a prison. The narcissist's struggle is a reflection of what happens to all of us when we let ego take the place of empathy, when we crave admiration more than connection. Yet within this understanding lies hope. The moment we see the pattern, we are no longer bound by it. Real love begins where self-deception ends. It is born in the courage to see ourselves honestly, to meet our wounds without fear, and to let go of the masks we have worn for acceptance. Love is not a performance. It is presence, a quiet state of being where giving and receiving flow naturally. When you awaken to this truth, you no longer need to chase affection or control others to feel whole. You realize that love does not arise from ego but from awareness, from the stillness within that sees without judgment and gives without condition. And in that awareness, the heart finally learns to love not as a mirror for the self, but as the essence of life itself.